Hello, I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and finance. This week, an unmanned business. It's drones versus warplanes and why it's more cost-effective to leave the pilot on the ground. And trendsetters who caught controversy. We talked to the head of Benetton about life in the Eurozone, Italy, and entrepreneurship. That plus an interview with the well-known British entrepreneur James Caan as we look for answers in this stagnant business world. But first, the business of drones. You hear about them a lot in the news, the unmanned aircraft which can either spy or attack, and as such have become a major part of the arms business. It's projected to be a $7 billion industry next year. Not much, I'll grant you, in the $1.6 trillion big picture of military spending. But it is the economics which has the world's biggest defence spender interested. In harsh economic times, it just makes sense. Have a quick look at this first from Rosalind Jordan, who explains the numbers.
To keep one 24-hour reconnaissance mission in the air would take 8 traditional manned planes, as many as 15 pilots, and about 96 mechanics. But the same mission using drones would need just 3 aircrafts with 4 pilots on the ground and just 35 mechanics. Researchers say the unmanned missions are often half the cost of traditional ones.
In a sense, you can fire and forget. If somebody shoots it down, too bad, send another one up and move it in. It's only $1 million. It's not a $300 million airplane.
Next year, the Obama administration wants to spend $4.8 billion on Global Hawks, Predators, and other drones. That's compared to nearly $15 billion requested for major aerial operations like fighter jets and surveillance aircraft.
Right, so all of that is the most common aspect we associate with unmanned aircraft. There are other applications too, though. James Bays looks at some of the new technology.
US military drones have taken decades to develop. This is a Reaper or MQ-9, Hellfire missiles and laser-guided bombs mounted under the wing. Each aircraft like this costs about $30 million. But much smaller drones are now being produced. The Hummingbird is also being developed using US military money. The inventors call this biological mimicry. It looks like a bird and can be used both indoors and outside with a tiny onboard camera for surveillance. It's highly sophisticated, but much more basic drone technology is now available off the shelf.
It's not like a nuclear bomb, where it takes a long time to acquire it. Within 5 years, the smallest of countries will be able to purchase UAVs in an open economy that the world, and you bet they're going after it.
Israel is one of the leaders in drone technology. Here, camera video from the air used to direct firefighters battling a forest ablaze. Unmanned aircraft are normally used by Israel to maintain military control, but in this troubled part of the world, they're not the only ones using drones.
This technology means that we're seeing a wider set of users. Beyond just the more than 45 nations that are now using military robotics, we've seen a wide range of non-state actors utilize them. They're non-state actors that range from organizations like Hezbollah, which flew unmanned systems against Israel in its war, to a couple of college kids gained this technology and actually developed an iPhone app to fly their own drone.
The newest generation of drones for warfare are designed to fly further, faster and remain hidden from view. They have stealth capability. But the possible uses go way beyond the battlefield. Anti-piracy work, border surveillance, infrastructure maintenance and environmental protection. There's no doubt much of the work done by planes today will be carried out with no pilot on board in the future.
And now you saw in that report Peter Singer, director of the 21st Century Defence Initiative at the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C. Well, we've got him back just now for a more in-depth look at this drone business. Peter, we are a business show, so I want to come at it from that angle. It just makes economic sense, doesn't it? If we leave aside any moral issues to do with war and why it happens, if it's going to happen, then it kind of makes sense this way.
Look, this is a technology that I think is useful in a business sense to think about the historic parallels. Robotics right now are where computers were around 1980, where the horseless carriage was around 1910. That is, it's a game-changing technology that we're seeing the first generation use of it, but more importantly, it's not just something that's going to stay within the military realm, it's also rapidly hitting out into the civilian sector. So the very same drones that we see operating in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, we're also seeing them used in domestic law enforcement roles. Do we see companies looking for spin-outs and everything from environmental monitoring to fisheries tracking, you name it. This is really the start of a much, much bigger industry.
And it's not by luck, is it? It's very much by design. I guess even with the amount of conflict that goes on in the world, it's not just a natural evolution. It's businesses and it's governments saying, we've got to find a more cost-effective way of doing this. And as I say, if it's going to happen, this is how it will.
These systems are really well suited for what they call the 3Ds. Jobs that are either dull, dirty, or dangerous. And we particularly see a demand for those in the more recent wars. Dull, war sounds exciting, but actually, can you keep your eyes open for 24 hours watching empty desert sand? An unmanned system can. Dirty, can you operate, can you see at night? Can you see through a dust storm? An unmanned system can. And then most importantly is the dangerous side, the ability to send the robot out into a mission that you'd rather not have a human inside, a human at risk. And so that's why you've seen a great appeal for these systems in the military side, not just in the US military, but right now there's at least 45 other nations out there that are also building, buying, and using military robots. But also that's why you see interest in the civilian side. There's a lot of different roles that are considered dangerous, and that's part of how we evaluate cost.
And what has the speed of this unmanned evolution been like from inception to the first sort of workable form of unmanned drone?
Well, the numbers I think that really show just how rapidly this has expanded, maybe appropriately is to look where we were in 2003 at the start of the Iraq War and where we are to now, where essentially we've just had the ceremonial ending of it, so to speak. So when the invasion force went into Iraq in 2003, it had a handful of these unmanned systems above it, none of them in really armed supportive roles. Now, in the U.S. military inventory alone, there's more than 7,000 of these systems. The invasion force on the ground had 0 unmanned ground vehicles that it used, ground robotics. There's now more than 12,000 in the U.S. military inventory. And of course, the U.S. is not the only user. Now, every one of the major powers out there, whether it's a Russia, China, but also most of the regional states surrounding Iraq, whether it's Iran to UAE to Turkey, you name it, all now have jumped into this military robotics game. This is a sector where we're seeing boom. India just recently put out, they wanted their Air Force to get a unmanned aerial system equivalent to the U.S. Predator. And they had 23 different companies offer up bids for their designs for what they thought they could build to meet that need. Just shows you, if this had been 10 years ago, not only the Indian Air Force wouldn't have wanted a Predator-like system, but you wouldn't have had 23 companies out there saying, we think we can do it.
Just a final quick thought from you, Peter, on the drawbacks of all of this. You've outlined clearly how efficient this form of warfare is. I'm sure there's got to be some drawbacks too.
Well, I think, again, these historic parallels are good ones. The computer, great technology, but it's also had ripple effects that have been very challenging in everything from law to privacy to new things like cyber warfare. The question is, what does it mean to have that all-seeing eye in the sky? It raises some really deep concerns about privacy and in constitutional democracies, questions of probable cause. It used to be that the police needed something, the equivalent of a search warrant, before they could peek behind your fence or peek inside your house. Well, now with technology, they're able to do that without the warrant. And so a lot of people are concerned about, what does that mean?
All right, Peter Singer there from the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C. Peter, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Take care.
To Europe now, we can't ignore it because it just won't allow us to. And even with all the summits and meetings in the last few weeks, The Eurozone, perhaps unsurprisingly, has yet to really take the measures needed to stem the debt crisis. Individual nations, though, are slowly sorting out their austerity measures. We're going to focus on Italy this week, where Prime Minister Mario Monti unveiled his spending and tax increase plans, all up $40 billion in a bid to balance the Italian budget by 2013. That is despite the economy contracting as much as 0.5% next year. Remember, it's Italy's huge $2.6 trillion debt mountain, which has many concerned, not to mention the billions more needed to repay creditors. Now, as ever on Counting the Cost, though, we think the best way to make sense of those numbers is to talk to actual business people. And when you think Italian business, clothing, fashion often come to mind. Companies like Benetton, founded in Treviso, currently listed in the fashion capital of Milan, 6,000 stores, 120 countries. And from humble beginnings too, the story goes that back in 1965, 30-year-old Luciano Benetton saw a market for the brand's now famous colourful clothing and sold his younger brother's bicycle to buy a second-hand knitting machine to get the business going. Clearly, it was all a success. Luciano's company, the Benetton Group, now turns over around €2 billion a year. And guess what? We've got his son on the show, Alessandra Benatar, now Executive Deputy Chairman of the Benetton Group, joining us from Counting the Cost's London studios. Alessandra, welcome. As I said just now, I'm interested to get your views as a businessman in Italy who does business there and all over the world. What is business confidence like? Forget the economic numbers, put them to the side. What's it actually like doing business there?
Okay, a good element about the Italian economy is that we got about 90% of the GNP of a country, which is based on small, medium-sized firms, mostly family-owned. And the spirit of those companies is continuously very active and very, I'm not going to say bullish, because clearly there is an outlook in the market which is fairly gloomy for these companies as well. But the enthusiasm that every single small, medium-sized firm has in its heritage and its attitude is still out there.
But how much does enthusiasm count for when demand is slowing, when your neighbours in Europe are slowing down as well? Does being confident, and does it really make a difference in the business world?
I think that this is a very good point. I think in this respect, there's a lot of preoccupation for what is going to happen at European level. I think all the entrepreneurs are big fan of a European project. I think the financial markets today are telling us, telling to the leaders of Europe, what is your project? Are you going to do a real Europe or you're not? And if you're not, all of you are going to be in trouble. In this context, these small, medium-sized companies are very much worried because we have a weak demand, we have an outlook, we have the cost of credit, which is just too high. So there is a lot of, in this respect, although entrepreneurs need to be optimistic by definition, there is a little bit of pessimism because of the gloomy outlook.
And what is it that's been hitting you the most? I saw your third quarter numbers, they were down. What has been the biggest impact on you?
Well, I was talking about small, medium-sized firms which have mostly Italian or European market. Fortunately, in the case of Benetton, we have an international, we are present in 120 countries. So for some core internal markets that are not doing so well, we're quite well balanced with emerging growth markets. I think about India, where by year end we'll be opening the 70 new stores on a yearly basis for a total of 450 stores. We employ 250 people. We export product out of India. I'm quite happy about what we're doing in Russia as well, the old Republic of Russia. We're doing quite fine in terms of increase in sales. I think we have a double-digit increase in sales. So there are some markets, emerging growth markets, that are balancing out what is happening in Europe.
And did I hear you correctly? I heard you talking to a member of our studio crew there in London before the show, that you're open in Kabul and in Afghanistan as well.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. I think we opened a few years ago, and this has been in the tradition of the company. As I said, we are present in 120 countries in the world, and we always made this as a philosophical statement and not just a business element, because we think it's important.
Okay, let's talk more about the business specifically. In a market like clothing and apparel, a huge market, how do you distinguish yourself? You know, who are your main competitors? How do you keep yourself up there with your competition?
This is a very good question and not an easy question to answer to when you are in 120 countries in the world, because every single country has a different environment from a competitive point of view. We like to think that our price point, the relationship between the quality, what we think is a high quality of a product at a very accessible price, is the so-called Benetton positioning, and we want to stick to that. So in doing this type of choice, of course, we are all the time very much alert about what competitors are doing. We are very much stimulated by what competitors are doing, but I don't think it would be a good idea to run after a different business formula or different situations just because some competitors are doing that.
All right, I have to ask about the advertising campaigns. I'm sure you get asked about this in every interview you do, but this most recent controversial campaign, we've got some pictures here called Unhate, with various world leaders kissing. Did you expect, no, you must have expected actually the type of reaction you get, because this has become a Benetton trademark.
Well, I think to a certain extent there is a continuation to a past philosophy, and the philosophy has always been of the one of sharing with the consumer and individuals in general, not just the consumer, a point of view, a philosophy, a statement, a level of attention on the topics that we thought were contemporary topics. And many contemporary topics many times are controversial by definition. I don't like when people tell me that there's some doing it on purpose for shocking people. That is definitely was not in the agenda. And if you think about North Africa, if you think about Wall Street, if you think about Rome, Athens, so many negative and hating action and situation have occurred. So it was some sort of scream of hope of saying, hey, let's look in a different direction. And of course, there was definitely no way of wanting to hurt anybody's feelings in doing this.
But do you think people got that?
In reality,
sorry to interrupt, Alessandra. Do you think people actually got that? Because you've said you don't like when people talk about the shock value. The fact is, it does have that effect. Even if you say you're not going for it, it does. Do you think people see past that enough and understand what you were trying to do?
I think that the data that we have collected in the web are telling us that more than 80% on the sentiment on the web, and we had many contacts, as you can imagine, on the campaign with especially the younger generation and the emerging markets, like well over 80% had a positive sentiment regarding the campaign. In other words, they got the message. And let's not forget that this campaign is about creating a foundation who's going to do actual things. So it's not just facts, but it's acts as well. And I think the younger generation is very sensitive to this. Like the younger generation is very sensitive to the financial situation.
Just a final thought from you, Alessandra. Going back to this idea of entrepreneurship, we have spoken to a lot of people on this show, the likes of Sir Richard Branson and Tony Fernandez, who all seem to say that these downturn times are the best times, when you shouldn't sit back and wait for things to get better. You should make them better. What do you think?
Oh, I think it's absolutely a point of view that I do share. In fact, and even when we talk not just as entrepreneurs, which it's in our nature to risk and make discontinuity choices during a discontinuity time. But I think it's also this time of moments can be very, very important for countries as well, because clearly there is something in the system that is not functioning. Just if I think about younger generation in the south of Europe, well, out of people between 25 and 35 years old, we've got 1/3 of these people that are not either working and they're not studying. And these people are basically telling us, hey, listen, I have nothing to do with derivatives and toxic instruments, and why should I pay the price for it? So I think we have an opportunity to redesign the future for future generations.
Alessandra Benatar from the Benetton Group. What a pleasure it's been talking to you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And we're going to continue this theme of entrepreneurship right now. We kind of like it here on Counting the Costs because it's about real people doing real business, whatever the economic climate. These are the people with a track record, so they are worth listening to. Earlier in the week, I spoke to one such person, James Caan, who's been opening and managing recruitment companies in the UK since the early 1980s. I put to him that same question I just put to Alessandra Benatar about not backing off in tough times. Have a watch.
I mean, you're absolutely right, Kamal. This is not the time for entrepreneurs to be backing off. I think having said that, around the world at the moment, the global economic crisis is affecting the opportunity for entrepreneurs to start businesses, and this is principally based on the lack of capital available. I certainly think in the Middle Eastern region, this is a great opportunity, I believe, for the Middle East to really pioneer the way forward on entrepreneurialism, because, the Middle East is one of the regions economically right now that is still doing quite well. If you look at GDP growth in Europe at the moment, we're projecting 0.2% growth next year, whereas the Middle Eastern region is forecasting nearly 2.5% growth, with Qatar at nearly 15%. So clearly there's a lot more liquidity in the Middle East, and I think one of the opportunities for the Middle East right now is to use some of the capital they're generating to actually encourage SME businesses, encourage entrepreneurialism.
That said, are there opportunities in and around Europe? Are you seeing any gaps in the market, again, because of the downturn?
I mean, right now, one of the areas, Kamal, that I see a lot of opportunity is principally in the digital media space. A lot of the businesses around Europe at the moment are seeing a lot of increase in jobs in that space. I've recently invested in a business called Gemini Search, which is a company that's actually matching talented people in a digital space to employers, and we're seeing nearly a 300% increase in jobs in that particular area. So I think there are opportunities in pockets of the economy where entrepreneurs should be investing in, and certainly venture capital companies, I think, are pouring money into this space because there is absolutely a growth opportunity in that space at the moment.
And is that where you're looking, without giving away any game secrets?
Yeah, I mean, certainly from my perspective at the moment, I'm very much focusing on backing entrepreneurs. Today, my private equity firm, Hamilton Bradshaw, we have nearly 40 businesses under our management control today. And I think the sectors that we're seeing opportunity is certainly in the energy sector, the renewable sector, the digital media sector. So whilst, clearly there is doom and gloom out there, I think what businesses need to focus on is which pockets of the economy can they see opportunities, and really to focus on that particular area. I think one of the challenges right now, I think certainly for the region, is we need to create a recovery in the economy which has to be jobs led. The biggest problem in the economy right now is the lack of jobs, and that's really, I think, the fundamental issue for the unrest both in the UK, Europe, and certainly in the Middle East.
And why is it that that's not been corrected? For how long have people been saying this needs to be a jobs-led recovery? Previous administrations in other countries have said this. They've been and gone and they've said it, and still the job creation isn't there. I know particularly where you are, the UK, I think the number of young people out of work is at record highs now.
It absolutely is. The last census that came out statistically showed there was over 1 million people between the age of 16 to 24 who are out of work, which is the record number since the statistics began. So clearly there is a bit of an issue here. The government is absolutely pouring a huge amount of capital in trying to stimulate jobs, but right now, because demand, for goods and services is quite low, I think where we're seeing opportunities in the UK is principally in the technology space. Our online opportunities in terms of the goods and services that we provide as the UK is absolutely flourishing at the moment. We're seeing exports at the highest number. And to give you some indication, Kamal, in October, UK exports were the highest they've been at 26.5 billion sterling. So exports from our perspective are pretty good at the moment, principally because I think UK is one of the few countries in Europe that is in control of its own currency. One of the disadvantages with Europe at the moment is because a lot of the countries in Europe are not in control of their currency. Their currency is overvalued, which is making their exports far too expensive, which I think is dampening the opportunity for Europe to see a recovery.
Final thought from you just quickly on sort of business confidence, and I guess I'm asking you to actually leave the nuts and bolts of business out of this and just tell me about sentiment and mood there, because I mean, it'd be great if you came along to someone and said, I want to back your ideas, but people have got to be in the right mood, the right sentiment to get up and make this happen, because it's tough times.
I mean, you're absolutely right. It is absolutely tough out there, but you know what? When you're an entrepreneur, when the markets are tough, I believe when the going gets tough, the tough should get going. Yes, of course, sentiment is difficult. The markets are very challenging, But that's the time when I think great entrepreneurs are born. If you look at some of the great entrepreneurs in history, they started their businesses when the markets were very difficult, because that's where opportunities lie. Certainly, I'm not afraid of investing right now. I'm still backing entrepreneurs, I'm backing businesses, because I believe if you can succeed right now, what would you be like when the markets recover to the normal level? So I see this as a moment of opportunity.
James Caan, pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Delighted. Thanks, Kamal.
And that is where we're going to leave you for this week. But if you want to get in touch, here's how you do it. Either send a tweet to me at Kamal AJE or our business editor at Abid Oliver Ali, all one word. If you're not on Twitter, email's just fine, counting the cost at aljazeera.net. While you're online, head to aljazeera.com/business and link on to the CTC page. We put all our episodes up in full there for you to catch up on whenever you want. But that is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. Next week, a special Year in Review programme dissecting the lows and even the highs of 2011. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.